There are doors in your life that you only recognize as doors long after you've passed through them. They don't announce themselves. They arrive disguised as ordinary Tuesday nights, as the mundane chime of a text message, as the low, familiar hum of your refrigerator. They look like every other moment, but they are fundamentally different. They are the moments that divide your life into a before and an after. For me, that door was the front door to my own apartment, and standing on the other side of it, silhouetted by the jaundiced glow of the hallway light, was Liam. It was just after 1 in the morning, and his voice over the phone minutes earlier had been a thread of frayed static, a quiet plea wrapped in a casual question. Can I come over? And my answer, a simple, yeah, of course, was the turning of the key. Now he was here. The air between us was thick with the things we hadn't said in the 7 years we'd known each other. A dense, humming silence that felt more significant than any conversation we'd ever had. I saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the slight slump of his shoulders, a posture of defeat that I had come to know intimately over the past few months. He wasn't just tired. He was adrift, a ship that had lost its moorings, and for reasons I was terrified to examine too closely, my quiet little apartment had become his only port in the storm. I stood there, holding the door open, feeling the cool night air snake around my ankles, and I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that if I let him cross this threshold tonight, the architecture of my life, of our friendship, would be altered forever. The old blueprints would be useless. We would be building something new in the dark, with no idea what it was supposed to become. We met in the most unceremonious way possible, a university housing assignment. I was a sophomore, a quiet, observant arts student who communicated better through the lens of a camera than with my own voice. My world was a carefully curated collection of quiet spaces, long shadows, and the melancholic beauty of things left unsaid. Liam was my polar opposite. He was a force of nature, a kinetic burst of energy and laughter that filled every room he entered. A computer science major and the star forward on the university's soccer team, he moved through the world with an effortless grace and a magnetic charm that drew people to him like moths to a flame. When I saw his name on the door next to mine, I felt a familiar pang of social anxiety. I prepared myself for a year of loud music, an endless parade of strangers, and the constant, draining pressure to be more outgoing than I was. I braced for an invasion. What I got, instead, was a friend. He was the sun, and I suppose, was the quiet planet that had unexpectedly found itself caught in his orbit. He never tried to change me. He seemed to understand, in an unspoken, intuitive way, that my silence wasn't a judgment or a weakness, but simply my native language. He learned to read my moods in the set of my jaw, in the way I held my camera, in the slight hesitation before I spoke. In return, I became the calm center of his chaotic universe. Our dorm room, and later our first cramped apartment, became his sanctuary, the one place he could shed the skin of the popular athlete and just be. He would collapse on the couch after a grueling practice or a long night of coding, and he would just stop. He'd talk, of course, rambling about team drama, impossible professors, or the latest girl who had caught his eye, and I would listen, offering quiet affirmations or the occasional dry, observational remark that would make him bark out a laugh. He called me his anchor. I never told him he was my entire ocean. The feelings I had for him didn't arrive in a sudden, crashing wave. They seeped in slowly, like a patient tide, until I was submerged and had forgotten what it felt like to breathe dry air. It started with small, inconsequential moments of beauty that I, as a photographer, was uniquely attuned to capturing, even if only in my memory. It was the way the late afternoon light would catch the gold flecks in his hazel eyes as he concentrated on a line of code, his brow furrowed in a way that was so intensely, achingly beautiful it made my chest hurt. It was the quiet sound of his breathing in the dark from the other side of our shared living room, a steady, rhythmic proof of life that became the soundtrack to my own insomnia. It was the casual, unthinking intimacy of our friendship, the way he would lean against me on the couch while we watched a movie, his warmth a solid, grounding presence, The way he'd steal a French fry from my plate without asking. The way he'd sometimes enter my room, my quiet, personal space, just to sit in silence while I edited photos, as if my stillness was something he needed to absorb. Each of these moments was a tiny, perfect photograph stored in the darkroom of my mind, developed in secret and cherished with a quiet, desperate intensity. I loved him. It was a simple, terrifying, and immutable fact of my existence. But I built a fortress around that love, reinforcing its walls with the mortar of our friendship. He was my best friend. He was straight. He was everything to me. And the thought of shattering that reality for a truth he might not want, a truth that might repulse him, was a risk I was unwilling to take. So I became an expert in the art of loving from a distance, of translating my yearning into the acceptable language of platonic affection. I became the loyal friend, the steadfast confidant, the keeper of his secrets, all while my own most vital secret pulsed beneath my skin, a silent, frantic drumbeat that only I could hear. His longest and most serious relationship was with a woman named Jessica. She was bright and bubbly and, from the outside, a perfect match for his sunny disposition. They were together for 3 years, a lifetime in post-collegiate dating. During that time, my role in his life shifted subtly. I was still the anchor, but now I was the one he came to when the waters of his relationship with her grew choppy. I listened to him analyze their fights, celebrated their anniversaries with a forced smile, and even helped him pick out a Christmas gift for her once, an experience that felt like swallowing shards of glass. I learned every nuance of their dynamic, every crack in their foundation, every hope he had for their future. I became a scholar of their love story, all while burying my own. I convinced myself that this was enough. To be this close to him, to be the one he trusted with his vulnerability, was a privilege. It was a painful, hollow kind of privilege, but it was all I thought I could ever have. So I played my part. I was the supportive friend, the unwavering constant in his life. I watched him fall in love, and I prepared myself to watch him build a life with her, a life in which I would always be a welcome guest, but never, ever the home. I resigned myself to a life in the margins of his story. And then, one rainy Tuesday in October, the story changed. He came home from dinner with her, drenched and pale, and uttered the 5 words that simultaneously broke my heart for him and lit a treacherous, forbidden spark of hope in the deepest part of me. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a kind of bewildered pain, and said, "She ended it. It's over." The breakup was not clean. It was a messy, protracted demolition of a shared life. It left Liam gutted, not just by the loss of Jessica, but by the sudden, deafening silence in the life he had built around her. He was a man who thrived on connection, on the energy of others, and he had suddenly been unplugged from his primary power source. He wandered our apartment like a ghost, his usual vibrant energy dimmed to a low, flickering pilot light. He stopped going out with his friends, his soccer teammates. He'd come home from his consulting job, his shoulders heavy with a weariness that had nothing to do with work, and retreat to his room. The silence that emanated from behind his closed door was heavier and more profound than my own had ever been. It was a silence of lack, of absence. And in that void, he started reaching for me. It began with the phone calls. At first, they were just that, calls. He would be at work, stuck on a frustrating project, and he'd call me, not for a solution, but just to vent, to hear a familiar voice. But then they started happening at night. He'd be in his room, I'd be in mine, separated by 10 feet of drywall and a universe of unspoken things, and my phone would light up with his name. The first time it happened, my heart leaped into my throat. I answered, my voice tight with a mixture of concern and a desperate, fluttering hope. "Everything okay?" I asked. Yeah, he'd said, his voice low and rough with sleep. "Just couldn't sleep. Mind if we just talk for a bit?" I didn't mind. I would have talked to him for 1,000 nights. So we talked. Or rather, he talked, and I listened. He rehashed the final conversations with Jessica, dissecting every word, every inflection, searching for a meaning that wasn't there. He talked about his job, the pressure, the feeling that he was on a path he hadn't consciously chosen. He talked about feeling hollowed out, untethered. I was his confessor, his late-night therapist, his sounding board. I would lie in my own bed, the phone pressed to my ear, my eyes closed, picturing him in his room, just down the hall. I could hear the rustle of his sheets, the soft sigh of his breath, and it was an intimacy so potent, so dangerously close to what I had always wanted, that it felt both like a gift and a form of exquisite torture. I was the keeper of his nighttime loneliness, the sole witness to his unraveling. And I knew, even then, that this was a fragile, transitional space. He was healing, and he was using my voice, my presence, as a balm. But I couldn't help but wonder what would happen when the wound finally closed. Would the call stop? Would the silence between our rooms return, this time feeling even more vast and empty than before? The ritual began to evolve. The phone calls, once a nightly occurrence, became the prologue to something new. One night, deep into a meandering conversation about nothing in particular, his voice grew quiet, hesitant. "This is stupid," he said, and I could hear the self-consciousness in his tone. "But I really don't want to be alone right now. Can I come over?" The question hung in the air between our phones, a fragile bridge between his loneliness and my longing. My apartment wasn't just over, it was 30 feet away, down the hall. The question wasn't about logistics, it was about permission. He was asking to cross a boundary, to bring his sadness, his physical presence, into my space. "Yeah," I said again, my voice betraying none of the turmoil in my chest. Of course, a few moments later, a soft knock on my bedroom door. I opened it to find him standing there in a faded t-shirt and plaid pajama pants, clutching his pillow like a child seeking comfort from a nightmare. He looked small and lost. He didn't come into my room, not then. He just gestured towards the living room. "I'll just crash on the couch, if that's cool," he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. Just better than being in my room. It was, of course, cool. I would have let him sleep on my floor if he'd asked. So he settled onto the couch, a lanky, 6'2" frame curled into a space that was clearly too small for him. I grabbed the thick wool blanket from the back of my armchair and draped it over him. His eyes were already closed, but he murmured a "thanks, man," his voice thick with impending sleep. I retreated to my room, leaving the door ajar, and lay in my bed, wide awake, listening. I listened to the soft creak of the couch springs as he shifted his weight. I listened to the sound of his breathing, deeper and closer than it had ever been over the phone. He was right there. He was just outside my door, a tangible, breathing, profoundly vulnerable presence in the quiet sanctuary of my home. It was agonizing. It was perfect. This became the new normal. The phone call, the quiet request, the soft knock, the migration to the couch. Sometimes he would have an excuse. "My radiator is making a weird noise," or "I think I left the window open and it's freezing in there." But as the weeks went on, the pretext fell away, leaving only the raw, unspoken need. He came over because he was lonely, and I let him in because I was in love. We existed in this strange, liminal space, a friendship that had begun to take on the shape and weight of something more, but without the language to define it. The couch became a symbol of this ambiguity. It was a bed, but not my bed. It was a space of intimacy, but one with built-in plausible deniability. He was close enough for me to feel his presence as a constant, humming current in the apartment, but far enough away to maintain the fiction that we were just friends, that this was just what friends did. The nights took on a pattern, a quiet choreography of unspoken need and carefully measured response. It would start around 11, sometimes midnight. We'd be in our separate rooms, the silence of the apartment a living thing between us. My phone would light up, not with a call anymore, but a text. Just his name, or a simple question mark. It was a signal, a gentle knock on the digital door. My reply was always the same. "Come on over." A few minutes later, he'd appear in the living room, a rumpled silhouette against the ambient city light filtering through the windows. He'd have his pillow tucked under his arm, the same faded plaid pants, the same look of quiet, weary gratitude on his face. He wouldn't speak much at first. He'd just collapse onto the couch, pulling the wool blanket up to his chin. I would be on the armchair, pretending to read a book or scroll through my phone, granting him the space to settle. The air would be thick with a comfortable, familiar tension. It was the tension of a question that both of us were afraid to ask, and even more afraid to answer. After a while, he'd start to talk. The conversations were different now, less about Jessica, less about the past, and more about the quiet, immediate present. He'd talk about a frustrating bug in his code, describing the logic with a meticulous detail I couldn't possibly follow, but it didn't matter. He wasn't looking for solutions. He was looking for a witness. He was externalizing his thoughts, letting them fill the space between us so it wouldn't be empty. I would talk about my photography, about a new series I was planning on urban decay, on finding beauty in abandoned places. He would listen with a surprising intensity, asking questions that showed he was genuinely engaged, that he saw the world through my descriptions. He saw me. In these late-night conversations, cocooned in the warm, dim light of my living room, we were more ourselves than we were anywhere else. The roles we played in the daylight world, the popular athlete, the quiet artist, melted away, leaving just two people finding solace in a shared space. One night, he fell asleep mid-sentence. His voice trailed off, his head lolled to the side against a cushion, and his breathing deepened into the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. I sat there for a long time, just watching him. The book lay forgotten in my lap. The city outside hummed its ceaseless lullaby. In the soft light, the lines of exhaustion on his face seemed to smooth out. He looked younger, more vulnerable, stripped of all his daytime charisma and confidence. He just looked like Liam. A powerful, overwhelming wave of tenderness washed over me, so potent it felt like a physical blow. It was a dangerous feeling. It was a feeling that made me want to cross the room, to kneel by the couch, to brush the stray lock of hair from his forehead. It made me want to do all the things I was not allowed to do. Instead, I stood up as quietly as I could, adjusted the blanket so it covered his shoulders, and went back to my room, closing the door until only a thin sliver of light connected our two worlds. I lay awake for hours, my heart a frantic, caged bird, beating against my ribs. I was living in a state of suspended animation, caught between the heaven of his proximity and the hell of my restraint. Every night was a test, a trial by fire. And every night, I passed, preserving the fragile ecosystem of our friendship for one more day, even as the longing to burn it all down grew more and more consuming. I was so focused on the boundaries I was maintaining that I didn't realize he was the one who was slowly, methodically, taking them down, brick by brick. The escalation was subtle, a gradual creep across the no-man's land that separated us. It started with him staying longer in the mornings. He'd wake up on the couch, groggy and disoriented, and I'd already be in the kitchen making coffee. I started making enough for two without even thinking about it. He'd take the mug I offered with a grateful smile, and we'd sit in a comfortable, domestic silence at my small kitchen table as the sun rose over the city. These mornings were almost more intimate than the nights. They felt real, established. They felt like a we. Then, the physical space between us began to shrink. We'd be watching a movie, me in the armchair, him on the couch, and he would shift, stretching his long legs out until his feet were resting on the edge of my chair. A casual, incidental touch that sent a jolt of electricity through my entire body. I would freeze, trying to act natural, my entire consciousness focused on the warmth of his socks pressed against the denim of my jeans. Another night, he claimed he was cold, and instead of just pulling the blanket tighter, he shifted to the end of the couch closest to my armchair and draped part of the blanket over my legs as well, creating a shared tent of warmth. We sat like that for 2 hours, watching some mindless action movie, a thin layer of wool the only thing separating his leg from mine. I don't remember a single line of dialogue from that film. I only remember the weight of the blanket, the heat radiating from his body, and the Herculean effort it took to keep my breathing even. I was an anthropologist studying a foreign culture, meticulously documenting every gesture, every subtle shift in protocol, trying to assemble a coherent narrative from ambiguous data. Did this mean what I thought it meant? Or was I just projecting my own desperate desires onto the innocent actions of a grieving friend? The internal debate was constant, a relentless courtroom drama playing out in the theater of my mind. The prosecution would present the evidence, the late-night texts, the shared blanket, the lingering touches. It was a clear pattern of escalating intimacy, a deliberate blurring of platonic lines. But then the defense would take the stand, arguing for reasonable doubt. He was lonely. He was heartbroken. He was tactile by nature. He saw me as a brother, a safe harbor, and I was twisting his need for comfort into something it was not. To assume romantic intent was arrogant, predatory even. I was his friend, and I was betraying that trust by even daring to hope for more. Each night, the jury was hung, and I was sentenced to another day of uncertainty. I lived on a knife's edge of hope and fear, and the fall to either side felt like it would be a fatal one. I was so caught up in my analysis, so lost in the labyrinth of my own head, that I missed the simplest explanation of all, that he was just as confused and scared as I was, and he was fumbling his way toward a truth he didn't yet have the words for. The night the world tilted on its axis started like any other in our new, strange routine. The text came at 11:47 p.m. A single word, "Hey," my reply, as always. Doors open, I heard him pad down the hallway and settle onto the couch with a heavy sigh. I was at my desk, trying to edit a set of photos, but my focus was shot. The energy in the apartment had shifted, as it always did when he was near. It was like a change in barometric pressure, a subtle but palpable charge in the air that signaled an impending storm. I gave up on work and went to join him, taking my usual seat in the armchair. He was staring at the ceiling, his hands laced behind his head. He looked pensive, his brow furrowed in a way that usually meant he was wrestling with a particularly nasty piece of code or a difficult thought. We were quiet for a long time. It wasn't the comfortable silence of our recent nights. It was a heavier, more deliberate silence, filled with the weight of things unsaid. "My back is killing me," he finally said, his voice quiet, directed at the ceiling. "This couch is starting to feel like a medieval torture device." A gentle, dry irony, my usual mode of communication, rose to my lips, but I swallowed it. This felt different. This felt like a prelude. "Sorry," I said, my own voice sounding inadequate. "You don't have to sleep on it, you know." "I know," he said, still not looking at me. He was quiet for another long moment. I could hear the clock ticking on my wall, each second a tiny hammer blow against the silence. "This is going to sound weird," he began, and my entire nervous system went on high alert. He finally turned his head to look at me, and his eyes were dark and serious. "But would it be okay if I just stayed in your room? I can sleep on the floor. I really don't want to be alone tonight. And my back really does hurt." The floor. He was offering to sleep on the floor of my bedroom. It was such a strange, boyish, almost comically chaste proposition, yet it felt like the most significant escalation yet. He was asking to cross the final threshold, to enter the most private space in my life. He was dismantling the last barrier between us, the one represented by my bedroom door. The couch offered plausible deniability. The floor of my bedroom did not. This was something else. This was a deliberate choice to be in my space, a choice that couldn't be explained away by comfort or convenience. My heart was a riot in my chest. My mind, the ever-present lawyer, was screaming objections. "This is a trap. This is a mistake. This will break you." But my heart, that foolish, hopeful traitor, had already made its decision. "You don't have to sleep on the floor, Liam," I said, my voice miraculously steady. "The bed's big enough." The silence that followed my offer was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It stretched and expanded, filling every corner of the room, pushing the air from my lungs. I watched him process my words, watched a series of micro-expressions flit across his face. Surprise, hesitation, relief, and something else, something I couldn't name, but it looked a lot like fear. Or maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the same thing I was feeling. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded, incapable of speech. The moment felt too fragile for words. A single wrong syllable could shatter it into a million pieces. He stood up from the couch, still clutching his pillow, and followed me to my room. The short walk down the hallway felt like a mile-long procession. My room was simple, almost monastic. A bed, a nightstand, a desk with my computer, and prints of my photographs tacked to the walls. Stark, black and white landscapes, lonely cityscapes, intimate portraits of shadows and light. It was a room that was a perfect reflection of me, and letting him into it felt like letting him see a part of my soul I usually kept hidden. He hovered awkwardly by the door for a moment, as if waiting for a final confirmation that this was real, that he was allowed to be here. I just pulled back the comforter on the side of the bed farthest from the door and got in, leaving the space open for him. It was an invitation. After a beat, he moved. He walked to the bed, placed his pillow down, and slid under the covers. He lay on his back, ramrod straight, his hands folded on his chest. There was a chasm of at least 2 feet of mattress between us, a carefully observed buffer zone. The only light came from the moonlight filtering through my window, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The room was utterly still, save for the sound of our breathing. His was shallow and quick. Mine felt like it was lodged in my throat. We lay there for what felt like an eternity, 2 statues in a sea of white sheets, hyper-aware of every inch of space, every rustle of fabric, every beat of our own frantic hearts. This was it. The culmination of months of ambiguous rituals, of years of unspoken feelings. We were here, in the same bed, and the silence was no longer comfortable. It was electric. It was screaming. I was certain he could hear my heart pounding against the mattress, a desperate Morse code signal I couldn't turn off. I kept my eyes fixed on the ceiling, tracing the patterns of the shadows, trying to anchor myself to something, anything, other than the overwhelming, terrifying, wonderful reality of his presence beside me. Ethan. His voice was a ghost in the darkness, so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. I turned my head on the pillow to look at him. He had turned onto his side to face me, his head propped up on his hand. The moonlight caught the side of his face, illuminating the earnest, searching look in his eyes. The chasm between us suddenly felt smaller, the air warmer. Yeah. My voice was hoarse. "Can I ask you something stupid?" he whispered. "Probably." I whispered back, a faint echo of our usual banter, a desperate attempt to pretend this was normal. He offered a small, sad smile. "This whole thing, me coming over, sleeping on the couch. It hasn't been weird for you." The question was a gift. It was an opening, a chance to be honest. But the years of self-preservation, the fortress I had built around my heart, were not so easily dismantled. "It's fine," I lied. "You've been going through a lot." "I get it." His face fell slightly, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes that made my stomach clench. He had offered me a door, and I had refused to walk through it. He looked away, back towards the window. "Right," he said, his voice flat. "Just friends being friends." He said the words like they tasted bitter in his mouth. We lapsed back into silence, but this time it was different. It was a silence of missed opportunity, of retreat. I had failed the test. My fear had been stronger than my love. I lay there, my eyes burning with unshed tears, cursing my own cowardice. I had spent years dreaming of a moment of connection like this, and when it finally arrived, I had fumbled it, let it slip through my fingers because I was too afraid to be vulnerable. I could feel him pulling away, retreating back behind his own walls. The space between us felt like it was growing again, the air cooling. I had to do something. I had to say something. The fear of losing him this way, to a misunderstanding born of my own terror, was suddenly greater than my fear of the truth. "Liam," I said, my voice shaking slightly. He turned back to look at me, his expression wary. "It has been weird for me," I confessed, the words tasting like freedom and terror. "It's been really, really hard." A look of profound relief washed over his features, so potent and so immediate that it stole my breath. It was the look of a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time and was finally able to exhale. "Hard how?" he whispered, his eyes searching mine, begging for the truth. This was it. The final door. No more metaphors, no more hiding. "Hard because I'm in love with you," I said, the words falling into the quiet space between us, stark and undeniable and terrifyingly real. And I have been for a very long time. He didn't speak. He just watched me, his hazel eyes wide in the moonlight, a storm of emotions swirling in their depths. I saw shock, yes, but it wasn't the revulsion I had always feared. It was something softer, something more complex. It was recognition. It was the look of someone seeing a landscape for the first time that they'd only ever read about in books. He slowly, deliberately, closed the remaining distance between us, shifting across the mattress until his knee brushed against mine. The contact was electric, a spark that lit up my entire body. He reached out a hand, his fingers trembling slightly, and gently cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. It was the most tender, intentional touch I had ever received from him. It wasn't the casual pat on the back of a friend. It was the deliberate, weighted touch of something more. "Ethan," he breathed, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't decipher. And then he leaned in. Time seemed to slow down, to warp and stretch. I was aware of everything. The scratch of his 5 o'clock shadow against my skin, the scent of his shampoo, the warmth of his breath. His eyes never left mine, asking a final, silent question. I gave a barely perceptible nod, my own final surrender. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of passion or frantic desire. It was a kiss of profound, heartbreaking gentleness. It was hesitant, soft, a question and an answer all at once. It was a confession. It tasted of loneliness and relief and a yearning so deep it felt like it had been accumulating for years, which, I supposed, it had. It was a kiss that said, "I see you. I'm scared. Me too." When he pulled back, he didn't go far. He rested his forehead against mine, and we just breathed together in the dark, our exhalations mingling in the small space between our faces. The world had irrevocably shifted. The fortress was in ruins. The blueprints were ash. We were standing in the wreckage, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid. "Okay," he whispered, his voice a ragged, emotional thing. It wasn't a declaration of love or a promise of a future. It was just an acknowledgement, an acceptance. It was the sound of a lock clicking into place. "Okay," I whispered back, my voice breaking on the single, perfect word. And in the beautiful, honest silence that followed, surrounded by the shadows and the moonlight, he held my face in his hands, and he kissed me again. And this time, there was no hesitation. There was only the quiet, stunning certainty of coming home. I woke to the pale, gray light of dawn filtering through my window and the unnerving feeling of being alone. The space beside me in the bed was empty, the sheets cold. A knot of pure, cold dread formed in my stomach. I sat up, listening. The apartment was silent. Too silent. I called his name, my voice a croak. "Liam." No answer. I threw back the covers and walked into the living room. The couch was empty, the wool blanket folded neatly on the cushion. His pillow was gone. I checked his room. The door was closed. I knocked softly. Nothing. I pushed it open. The room was empty, his bed made with military precision. A quick glance around told me his gym bag was gone, as were the running shoes he usually left by the door. He was gone. He had run. The beautiful, fragile certainty of the night before shattered into a million tiny, sharp pieces. The silence that had felt so honest and peaceful now felt accusatory and empty. The air, which had been charged with possibility, was now thin and stale. I sank onto the couch, his couch, and buried my face in my hands. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, creeping flush that started in my chest and spread through my entire body. I had been a fool, an utter and complete fool. I had misinterpreted everything. The late-night calls, the shared blanket, the move from the couch to my bed. It hadn't been a slow, fumbling courtship. It had been the desperate, confused actions of a lonely, heartbroken man seeking comfort from the nearest available source. He hadn't been seeking me. He had been seeking an absence of loneliness. The kisses, what had they been? A moment of curiosity? A lapse in judgment? A terrible, cruel mistake? Every fear I had ever harbored about my feelings for him came rushing back, a tidal wave of self-loathing and regret. I had taken his vulnerability and twisted it into something it wasn't. I had been arrogant. I had pressured him. I had ruined the single most important friendship of my life for a few stolen moments of intimacy that, in the harsh light of day, meant nothing to him. I felt used, but worse than that, I felt like the user. I had wanted it so badly that I had convinced myself he wanted it too. The quiet observer had finally stepped into the frame, and in doing so, had destroyed the entire composition. The pain was a dull, heavy ache behind my ribs, a familiar weight I had carried for years, but now it was heavier, sharper. Before, it was the pain of unrequited love. Now, it was the agony of love offered and then, in the stark, silent light of morning, emphatically rejected. The next 3 days were a masterclass in psychological torture. We were two ghosts haunting the same apartment, moving through the shared spaces with a careful, silent choreography designed to ensure we never made contact. If I was in the kitchen, he would stay in his room. If he was in the living room, I would find a sudden, urgent need to organize my closet. We communicated through absence, through the sound of a door clicking shut just as another one opened. The silence was no longer a space of possibility. It was a weapon. It was a thick, suffocating fog of awkwardness and unspoken accusations. He looked exhausted, haunted. Dark circles had appeared under his eyes, and his shoulders were permanently slumped in a posture of defeat. He wouldn't look at me. If our paths did accidentally cross in the hallway, his eyes would dart to the floor, to the wall, anywhere but my face. He would murmur a clipped, "Hey," and brush past me as if I were a stranger, a piece of furniture. Each time it happened, it was like a fresh cut on an open wound. The rejection was constant, a low, humming frequency of pain that permeated every moment of my day. My apartment, once my sanctuary, now felt like a prison. My bedroom, the scene of my greatest hope and deepest humiliation, felt contaminated. I couldn't sleep in the bed without feeling the ghost of his presence, without replaying the kiss, without feeling the crushing weight of the empty space beside me. I started sleeping on my own couch, a miserable, ironic penance. I was drowning in the ambiguity. The not knowing was infinitely worse than a clean, clear rejection. I could have handled, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I'm not gay. I was just confused," it would have hurt, but it would have been an answer. This silence, this avoidance, it left everything open to interpretation, and my mind, my own worst enemy, filled the void with the most painful narratives possible. He was disgusted with me. He was disgusted with himself. He pitied me. He was trying to figure out how to ask me to move out. After 3 days of this silent, cold war, I knew I couldn't survive a fourth. The friendship, if it even still existed, was already dead. The silence was killing it, slowly and painfully. I had nothing left to lose. Clarity, even a painful clarity, was better than this agonizing suspense. That evening, I saw the light on under his door. I took a deep breath, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I walked down the hall. I knocked on his door, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent apartment. For a moment, there was no response, and I thought he might just pretend he wasn't there. But then I heard a muffled, "Yeah?" I opened the door. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone, though I could tell he wasn't really seeing it. He looked up when I entered, and for the first time in 3 days, his eyes met mine. I saw panic in them, and a deep, profound sadness. "We need to talk," I said, my voice quiet but firm, leaving no room for escape. He didn't argue. He just nodded, a slow, resigned gesture, and patted the space on the bed next to him. The invitation felt hollow, a ghost of the easy intimacy we once shared. I ignored it and pulled his desk chair over, sitting opposite him, creating a deliberate space between us. I needed this to be a confrontation, not a cozy chat. I needed the distance to protect myself. I sat there for a moment, gathering my thoughts, trying to arrange the chaotic storm of my emotions into coherent sentences. He waited, his gaze fixed on his hands, which were clenched together so tightly his knuckles were white. "I'm not mad, Liam," I started, and was surprised to find that it was true. The anger had burned away, leaving only a deep, aching hurt. I'm lost, and I can't live like this." I can't live in this apartment with the silence and the awkwardness. It's killing me. I paused, taking a shaky breath. What happened the other night? It happened. And you running away in the morning and avoiding me for 3 days, that happened, too. I just need to understand. I need you to be honest with me, for the first time in months. What was it? What am I to you? Was I just a convenient warm body because you were lonely? Was it a mistake? If it was, just tell me. I can take it. I swear I can. But this uncertainty, this feeling like I'm some dirty secret you're ashamed of, I can't take that. So please, my voice cracked, betraying the composure I was trying so hard to maintain. Just tell me the truth. He still wouldn't look at me. His shoulders started to shake, a small, almost imperceptible tremor at first, but then it grew into a full-body shudder. He let out a choked, ragged sob, a sound of such profound anguish that it knocked the wind out of me. He buried his face in his hands, his elbows on his knees, and he just fell apart. The sound of his weeping filled the small room, a raw, unfiltered expression of the pain he had been holding in for days, for weeks, maybe for his entire life. My own pain receded, replaced by a familiar, overwhelming urge to comfort him. It was an instinct honed over 7 years of friendship. I wanted to go to him, to put my hand on his back, to tell him it was okay. But I didn't. I stayed in my chair. I had asked for the truth, and I knew that this breakdown was part of it. He needed to get through this on his own. After a long time, the sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. He finally lifted his head from his hands, his face streaked with tears, his eyes red and swollen. He looked broken. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I'm so sorry. It wasn't a mistake. That's what's been messing me up. The kiss, it wasn't a mistake. The mistake was me running away." He took a deep, shuddering breath, as if steeling himself to voice thoughts he had never dared to articulate before. "When Jessica and I broke up," he began, his eyes finally meeting mine, raw and vulnerable. "It was more than just a breakup. It was like the whole identity I had built for myself just crumbled. I was the soccer guy, the guy with the pretty girlfriend, the guy who had his life all mapped out. And suddenly, none of that was real. And the person I wanted to talk to, the only person I felt safe with, was you. It's always been you." He shook his head, a look of bewildered discovery on his face. "I told myself it was because you're my best friend. And you are. But it was more than that. The calls, me sleeping on the couch. I needed to be near you. You're calm. You're quiet. It was like an antidote to the chaos in my own head. I was borrowing your peace because I didn't have any of my own." He looked down at his hands again, a flush of shame creeping up his neck. "And I didn't let myself look at what that really meant. I just took the comfort you gave me, and I didn't think about what it was costing you. I was being selfish. But the more time I spent with you, in that quiet space, the more I realized that the peace I felt wasn't just about friendship. It was different. When I was with Jessica, I was always on. I was playing a part. With you, I'm just me. And I started to realize that I liked that version of myself a lot more." His confession was a slow, painful excavation of his own heart. He was discovering these truths even as he was speaking them. "That night," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "in your bed, I was terrified. Not of you, but of myself. Because lying there next to you felt more right, more like home, than anything I had ever felt with her, or with anyone. And when I kissed you, it was like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know was there. Everything suddenly made sense. All the confusion, the loneliness, it was all pointing to you. Then why did you run?" I asked, my voice gentle. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, aching empathy. "Because it's one thing to feel it," he said, his voice cracking again. "It's another thing to accept it. To accept what it means. My whole life, I've been this one thing. And in one night, that entire self-image was shattered. I woke up the next morning, and I looked at you sleeping, and you looked so peaceful, and all I felt was this overwhelming panic. Who am I? What does this mean? I didn't know how to be the person who had done that, who had felt that. I felt like a fraud. So I ran. I went to the gym. I ran until I couldn't breathe, trying to outrun the feeling. But it didn't work. I've spent the last 3 days in a complete tailspin, hating myself for hurting you, and terrified of what it means that I don't regret the kiss itself. I regret running. I regret it so much. He finally looked up at me, his eyes pleading. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that it wasn't a game. It wasn't a mistake. It was the realest thing I've felt in a very long time. And it scared me to death. The silence that settled in the room after his confession was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the screaming silence of avoidance or the electric silence of anticipation. It was a quiet, fragile silence of pure, unadulterated truth. It was the quiet of a landscape after a storm has passed, leaving the air clean and the world raw and new. All the anger, all the hurt I had been nursing for 3 days simply evaporated, replaced by a wave of understanding so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. I saw him then, not as the source of my pain, but as someone who was in a pain of his own, a pain of confusion and fear and a lifetime of unexamined expectations. He hadn't been rejecting me. He had been rejecting a version of himself he was not yet ready to face. I stood up from the chair and closed the distance between us. I sat on the bed next to him, and this time it felt right. I didn't say anything. I just reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold, but they curled around mine, clinging to me with a desperate strength. We sat like that for a long time, side by side, our hands clasped between us, just breathing in the quiet of the room. It was an anchor in the storm of his confusion and my lingering hurt. It was a silent promise that whatever came next, we would face it together. I was so scared, he finally whispered, his voice thick. I was scared I'd lost you, that I'd destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too much of a coward to be honest. You almost did, I said, my voice gentle but firm. The silence was worse than any rejection would have been, Liam. Don't ever do that to me again. I won't, he promised, his grip on my hand tightening. I swear, we were starting over. This was our new foundation, built not on the comfortable, unexamined assumptions of our old friendship, but on the rubble of our fears and the bedrock of a painful, liberating honesty. There were no grand declarations, no passionate kisses. There was just this, the quiet, profound intimacy of two people holding hands in a messy bedroom, having chosen truth over fear. So what now? He asked, the question hanging in the air, full of both hope and trepidation. I looked at our joined hands, at the way his fingers fit so perfectly between mine. I thought of the years of quiet longing, the months of agonizing ambiguity, the days of painful silence. And I thought of the future, a blank page we now had to write together. Now, I said, turning to look at him, a small, real smile touching my lips for the first time in days. We learn how to do this. Together, the days that followed were a study in quiet navigation. We were mapping a new country, a territory that had no name and no set of established rules. The grand, dramatic confession gave way to a series of small, tentative gestures, each one a question and an answer. The first morning after our talk, I woke up in my own bed to the smell of coffee. When I walked into the kitchen, Liam was there, leaning against the counter, 2 mugs already filled. He handed one to me, his fingers brushing against mine, and this time, the touch was not accidental. It was deliberate. His eyes met mine over the rim of his mug, and he gave me a small, shy smile that I returned. There were no words, but the message was clear. I'm still here. I didn't run. That night, there was no text. There was no knock. Around 11, he just appeared at my open bedroom door, his pillow under his arm, his expression uncertain. He wasn't asking to escape his own loneliness anymore. He was asking to share my space. I simply pulled back the covers on his side of the bed, a silent invitation. He got in, and we lay there in the dark, the space between us no longer a chasm of fear, but a quiet field of potential. He didn't immediately reach for me. We just lay there, getting used to the new shape of the silence, a silence that was now filled with a calm, humming certainty instead of a screaming anxiety. After a while, he rolled onto his side to face me. Hey, he whispered. Hey, I whispered back. He reached out and tentatively took my hand under the covers, lacing his fingers with mine. Is this okay? He asked, his voice soft with a vulnerability that still made my heart ache. It's more than okay, I said, squeezing his hand. And it was everything. He fell asleep like that, holding my hand, his breathing slow and even. I stayed awake for a long time, just feeling the weight of his hand in mine, the warmth of his body next to me, listening to the quiet rhythm of his sleep. The war was over. The frantic analysis, the fear, the second-guessing, it was all gone, replaced by a profound and overwhelming sense of peace. This wasn't the fiery, passionate romance of movies. It was something quieter, deeper, and infinitely more real. It was the peace of a long-held tension finally being released. It was the peace of finding a home in the most unexpected and familiar of places. We began to build a new language, one spoken not in grand declarations, but in the syntax of daily life. It was in the way he started leaving his toothbrush in the holder next to mine. It was in the way I started buying the brand of orange juice he liked, without even making a conscious decision to do so. It was in the way we'd cook dinner together, moving around each other in the small kitchen with an easy, unspoken choreography. He would chop the vegetables while I manned the stove, our shoulders occasionally brushing, a casual touch that now felt like a reaffirmation, a quiet, "I love you" spoken in the language of shared domesticity. The couch in the living room was just a couch again. It was no longer a symbol of our ambiguous boundary, a temporary bed in a no-man's land. Now, we would sit on it together, his arm draped casually around my shoulders or my head resting on his chest as we watched a movie, the easy physical intimacy a given, not a question. My camera, which had for so long been a tool for loving him from a safe distance, became a way of celebrating our newfound closeness. I started taking pictures of him again, but they were different now. They weren't stolen glances or portraits of unknowing vulnerability. I took a picture of his hand resting on my knee as I drove. I took a picture of him sleeping in my bed, the morning light tracing the curve of his spine. I took a picture of him laughing in the kitchen, his face open and unguarded. They were photographs of us, of the quiet, beautiful world we were building together, frame by frame. He, in turn, began to open up parts of himself he had always kept guarded. He told me about his childhood, about the pressure from his father to be the perfect athlete, about the deep-seated fear of failure that drove him. He showed me the vulnerable, uncertain boy beneath the confident, charming man, and I loved him all the more for it. Our love story wasn't written in poems or love songs. It was written in grocery lists, in shared mugs of coffee, in the comfortable silences that filled our apartment. It was a quiet, sturdy thing, built to last. One Saturday afternoon, about a month after our talk, I was in my room archiving old photo files on my computer. Liam came in and sat on the edge of my bed, watching me. He was quiet for a few minutes, just observing, a small smile playing on his lips. "What are you looking at?" he finally asked. "Just old stuff," I said, clicking through folders. From college, I navigated to a folder from our sophomore year, the year we met. A series of images I had taken of him flashed across the screen. Him laughing with teammates on the soccer field. Him asleep on the dorm room couch, a textbook open on his chest. Him staring out the window of our room, lost in thought. He was so young, so unaware of the quiet, adoring eyes watching him from behind the camera. "I was already in love with you then, you know," I said, the confession easy and light, no longer a terrifying secret, but a simple statement of fact. He reached out and placed his hand on the back of my neck, his fingers warm against my skin. I think I was too," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I just didn't know what to call it. I just knew that my world felt right when you were in it. It felt balanced. I thought it was friendship, but it was always more. I was just too scared to look at the more." He squeezed my neck gently. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For waiting," he said simply. "For being patient enough for my stupid, scared brain to catch up with my heart." I turned in my chair to face him, and he leaned in and kissed me, a slow, sweet kiss that was full of gratitude and a quiet, unshakable certainty. It was the kiss of two people who had navigated a storm and found a safe harbor in each other. It was the kiss of coming home. There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, and you only understand their true significance in retrospect. A housing assignment, a late-night phone call, a friend asking to sleep on your couch. They seem small, inconsequential, but they are the hinges on which your entire life can turn. For years, I had lived in a room of my own making, a quiet, solitary space where I was safe, but also profoundly alone. I had loved Liam from behind a wall of my own fear, convinced that the door between us was permanently locked. But I was wrong. The door was never locked. It was just waiting. It was waiting for a lonely, heartbroken man to knock. It was waiting for him to be brave enough to ask to come inside, and for me to be brave enough to let him in. The journey we took was not an easy one. It was a winding, uncertain path through a landscape of ambiguity and fear. But we navigated it. We stumbled, we retreated, we confronted, and we finally found our way to an honest place. Now, the door to my room is closed at night, not to keep the world out, but to keep us in, together, in the quiet, peaceful sanctuary we have built. The late-night calls have been replaced by late-night whispers, confessions, and dreams shared in the intimate darkness. The borrowed comfort has been replaced by a shared life. We began to heal, not in a grand, dramatic moment of catharsis, but in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned, at long last, to create together.